Los Angeles International Airport, March 2002. The departure gate at LAX buzzed with the usual chaos of modern air travel. Business travelers hunched over laptops, families corralled restless children, and flight attendants prepared for the red-eye to New York. Among the scattered passengers waiting to board Flight 447, few noticed the broad-shouldered figure in the corner seat, head down, baseball cap pulled low. Mike Tyson, once the most feared man on the planet, sat quietly with his thoughts, trying to disappear into the background of ordinary life. He was 45 days removed from his last fight, a brutal knockout loss that the media had dissected with surgical precision. The headlines had been merciless: the end of an era, Iron Mike rusts, from champion to cautionary tale. Tonight, he just wanted to get home without incident, without cameras, without the world reminding him of who he used to be. But the universe had different plans. 30 feet away, near the customer service desk, stood Joseph Carrington, a name known only to regional boxing circuits and the regulars at his Boston gym. At 6'2" and 210 pounds of chiseled muscle, Carrington carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd never truly been tested. He'd accumulated a respectable 23-2 record fighting opponents whose names appeared on undercards and in small-town newspapers. He'd spent years telling anyone who would listen that the legends of boxing's golden era were overrated, that Mike Tyson's reputation was built on fear and mythology rather than actual skill. Tonight, fortified by 3 airport bar whiskeys and the encouragement of 2 friends who knew better but said nothing, Carrington spotted his opportunity to prove it. "That's him," Carrington muttered to his companions, his eyes locked on the figure in the corner. "That's Mike Tyson." His friend Marcus grabbed his arm. "Man, don't. Just leave it alone." But Carrington shook him off, his chest swelling with liquid courage and years of pent-up resentment toward icons he believed didn't deserve their pedestals. He began walking toward Tyson, each step fueled by a dangerous cocktail of alcohol, ego, and the fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be truly dangerous. As he approached, other passengers began to notice. The energy shifted. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. A mother instinctively pulled her daughter closer. Carrington stopped directly in front of Tyson's seat and spoke the words that would change his life forever. "You know, I never understood what the big deal was about you. I think I could have taken you in your prime." To understand what happened next, you must first understand what Mike Tyson carried with him onto that plane. This wasn't just a man. This was a living repository of violence, discipline, and psychological warfare refined to its purest form. By age 20, Tyson had become the youngest heavyweight champion in history, a force of nature who entered the ring with the cold certainty of a predator. His opponents often looked defeated before the opening bell, their eyes betraying the truth that they were already fighting their own fear rather than the man across from them. Tyson's power didn't come solely from his devastating uppercuts or his ability to slip punches with the fluid grace of a dancer. It came from something deeper, a darkness forged in the brutal streets of Brownsville, Brooklyn, where survival meant learning to hurt others before they hurt you. Cos D'Amato, his mentor and father figure, had taken that raw street violence and transformed it into something transcendent. D'Amato taught Tyson that intimidation began long before physical contact, that the mind could be conquered before the body ever felt a punch. "The fight is won or lost far away from witnesses," D'Amato used to say, "behind the lines, in the gym, and out there on the road, long before I dance under those lights." Tyson had internalized this philosophy until it became his DNA. Even now, years past his prime, that essential nature remained. The reflexes might have slowed, the stamina might have diminished, but the core remained intact, the ability to assess threat, calculate response, and execute with devastating precision. Tyson looked up slowly from beneath the brim of his cap. His eyes, dark and unreadable, fixed on Carrington with an intensity that seemed to drop the temperature in the immediate vicinity. He didn't speak immediately. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. Around them, the gate area had gone completely still. Even the flight attendants, trained to manage difficult situations, froze in place, sensing that whatever was unfolding fell outside their handbook of protocols. "You don't know me," Tyson said finally, his voice low and controlled, carrying the weight of someone who'd spoken these words before to other foolish men who mistook quiet for weakness. Carrington, emboldened by the audience and his own mythology about himself, pressed forward. I know your record. I know you beat up a bunch of scared fighters who were afraid before they even stepped in the ring. But me. I'm not scared of you, Mike. Never have been." The words hung in the air like a challenge that couldn't be taken back. Tyson stood up slowly, deliberately, rising to his full 5'10" frame. But something about the way he moved made him seem to fill the entire space. His shoulders rolled back almost imperceptibly, his weight shifted to the balls of his feet. Small adjustments that anyone who'd ever trained in combat sports would recognize as the body's autonomic preparation for violence. "You should be," Tyson replied, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow everyone within 30 feet heard it perfectly. What happened next wasn't a physical altercation in the traditional sense. There were no punches thrown, no grappling, no security rushing in to separate two men. Instead, what unfolded was something far more primal, a psychological dismantling executed with surgical precision. Tyson took one step closer to Carrington, closing the distance to approximately 18 inches. This violated every social norm about personal space, creating immediate psychological pressure. Carrington instinctively stepped back, and in that single backward step, the entire dynamic shifted. Tyson had established dominance without laying a finger on him. "You know what the difference is between you and me?" Tyson asked, his eyes never leaving Carrington's face. "You think violence is something you do. For me, it's something I am. It's in every breath I take, every thought I have. I've hurt people in ways that still wake me up at night. I've stood over men and watched the light change in their eyes when they realized they'd made a terrible mistake." The air grew thick with anticipation. Carrington's bravado was visibly crumbling. The alcohol that had fortified his courage now betrayed him, making his hands tremble slightly. Sweat began to bead on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His friends, who had watched from a distance, now looked away, unwilling to be associated with the spectacle. Tyson continued, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "You think you understand what it means to hurt someone? To really hurt them? You've been in some fights, won some matches against guys who were trying to build their own records. That's not the same as what I did. I ended careers. I sent men to hospitals. I made champions quit their sport because they never wanted to feel what I made them feel." Every eye in the terminal turned toward the confrontation. The truth was washing over Carrington in waves. This wasn't the older, slower, media-battered Mike Tyson he'd convinced himself existed. Standing before him was the essential core of something far more dangerous, a man who'd spent his entire life studying and executing violence, who'd forgotten more about hurting people than Carrington would ever learn. "Here's what's going to happen," Tyson said, his voice dropping even lower. "You're going to walk away. You're going to get on this plane, sit in your seat, and think very carefully about the difference between confidence and delusion. And you're going to thank whatever God you believe in that I'm not the man I used to be, because that man wouldn't have given you a choice." Carrington stood paralyzed, caught between his ego's desperate need to save face and his body's primal recognition of genuine danger. His mouth opened, perhaps to offer some final retort, some way to salvage pride from the wreckage of his bravado. But nothing came out. The words died in his throat because some part of his brain, the ancient part responsible for survival, had taken control and vetoed any further provocation. Time seemed to slow as the moment stretched toward its inevitable conclusion. Tyson didn't blink. His gaze remained fixed, unwavering, carrying decades of experience in these exact moments. He'd seen this look before, the moment when bravado crumbles and reality crashes through the fantasy. It happened in training gyms when sparring partners realized they were outmatched. It happened across the ring when opponents understood, usually in the first round, that they'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. And it was happening now, in this sterile airport terminal, under fluorescent lights that hummed indifferently above the unfolding drama. Marcus, Carrington's friend, finally found his courage. Not the courage to confront Tyson, but the courage to save his friend from further humiliation. He stepped forward, hands raised in a universal gesture of peace. "Hey, man, we're sorry. He's had too much to drink. We meant no disrespect." Tyson's eyes shifted to Marcus, assessing, calculating. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he gave the slightest nod. "Get him out of here, he said simply. Marcus grabbed Carrington's arm, pulling him backward. Carrington offered no resistance, his body moving mechanically, his eyes still locked on Tyson with a mixture of fear and something else, recognition, perhaps, of how close he'd come to discovering exactly what his body could endure. Silence consumed the terminal. As Carrington and his friends retreated to the opposite end of the gate area, the spell broke. Conversations resumed in hushed tones. A teenager pulled out his phone, though whether he'd managed to capture anything was unclear. A businessman who'd watched the entire exchange caught Tyson's eye and gave a small nod of respect, the kind of acknowledgement one gives when witnessing something raw and true in a world increasingly built on pretense. Boarding proceeded 15 minutes later with an unusual orderliness. Carrington and his friends had mysteriously disappeared, having opted for a later flight. The story circulated among passengers in whispers, each retelling adding layers and subtracting accuracy until the truth was buried beneath speculation and embellishment. Tyson returned to his corner seat, pulled his cap back down, and closed his eyes, trying to reclaim the peace that had been shattered by one man's misguided need to test a legend. But sleep didn't come easily. The encounter had pulled Tyson back into a mindset he'd been trying to escape, the constant readiness for violence, the hair-trigger awareness that had defined his prime years. He'd meant what he said to Carrington. There was a version of Mike Tyson, perhaps the one from 1988, who wouldn't have shown such restraint. That Tyson was a storm of barely controlled rage, a fighter who thrived on confrontation and fed off the fear he generated. This Tyson, the 2002 version, was trying to be something different, though the old self remained just beneath the surface, always ready, always waiting. The flight attendant approached cautiously after takeoff. "Mr. Tyson, I just wanted to say thank you for handling that situation with such restraint. It could have gone very differently." Tyson opened his eyes and offered a tired smile. "Yeah, it could have. But I'm tired of being that guy everyone expects me to be. Sometimes the hardest fight isn't against someone else, it's against who you used to be." She nodded, understanding more than he expected, and quietly moved on. In the weeks that followed, the story of the airport confrontation spread through boxing gyms and internet forums with the speed of digital wildfire. Carrington, to his credit, never publicly confirmed or denied the encounter, but his fighting style noticeably changed in subsequent matches. Trainers who worked with him remarked that he'd lost some essential swagger, some belief in his own invincibility that had previously defined his approach. His career continued for another 3 years, but the trajectory had flattened. He never broke through to the level he'd once believed was his destiny. For Tyson, the incident became another entry in the vast ledger of moments that defined his complicated legacy. It didn't make headlines or become a viral video sensation. This was 2002, before smartphones in every pocket turned every confrontation into content. Instead, it existed in that liminal space between myth and reality, whispered about among those who claimed to know someone who was there, embellished in some tellings, diminished in others, but always carrying the essential truth, that legends are built not just on what they do, but on what they're capable of doing and choose not to. What the airport encounter revealed wasn't Tyson's capacity for violence. That was already well documented across 20 years of professional fighting. Instead, it revealed something more nuanced and perhaps more impressive, his capacity for restraint. True power, the kind that resonates beyond physical strength, lies not in the ability to destroy but in the wisdom to choose differently. Tyson could have hospitalized Carrington. The legal consequences would have been manageable. His lawyers were well versed in negotiating settlements and plea agreements. The physical act would have taken seconds. One clean punch, the same uppercut that had crumpled Jesse Ferguson's face or the hook that had sent Michael Spinks into stunned disbelief, would have ended the confrontation definitively. But it also would have ended something else, the fragile progress Tyson was making toward becoming someone beyond the savage mythology. Every legend reaches a moment where they must choose between who they were and who they want to become. In that airport terminal, Tyson made his choice. He wielded the weapon of his reputation, his presence, and his psychological mastery instead of his fists. He proved that the most devastating knockout doesn't always leave someone unconscious on the canvas. Sometimes it leaves them standing, aware, and fundamentally changed in their understanding of the hierarchy of danger. For Joseph Carrington, the lesson was immediate and permanent. He'd entered that confrontation believing that reputation was exaggeration, that legends were inflated by media and mythology. He left understanding that some reputations are earned through rivers of blood, sweat, and an intimacy with violence that most people can't comprehend. There's a vast difference between knowing about violence academically and knowing it intimately, the way a craftsman knows his tools, the way an artist knows his medium. Carrington had trained hard, won fights, and built respectable skills. But he'd done so in the relative safety of organized sports with rules, referees, and the assurance that certain lines wouldn't be crossed. Tyson came from a different world, one where violence wasn't a sport but a survival mechanism, where the streets of Brownsville taught lessons that no gym could replicate. That fundamental difference in origin created a gap that no amount of training could bridge. The moment that lasted seconds would echo through years. Years later, in a rare interview with a boxing podcast, Carrington was asked about his most memorable moment in or around the ring. He paused for a long time before answering. "I once stood face to face with Mike Tyson," he said quietly. "And in those 30 seconds, I learned more about myself than in all the fights I ever had. I learned the difference between thinking you're tough and actually understanding what toughness means. I learned humility, I guess. Not the fake kind you're supposed to say in interviews, but the real kind that changes how you move through the world." The interviewer pressed for details, but Carrington deflected, keeping the specifics vague. Some lessons, he'd learned, were too personal to become entertainment for others. What makes Mike Tyson's legend endure isn't just his knockout highlights or his championship belts. It's the accumulation of these moments, the gym confrontations, the street encounters, the prison stories, and the quiet incidents that never made headlines. Each contributes to the composite picture of a man who existed at the extreme edge of human capability for controlled violence. Boxing historians often debate who was the greatest heavyweight: Ali's speed and intelligence, Foreman's raw power, Louis' technical perfection, or Tyson's ferocious intensity. But such debates miss the larger point. Tyson's greatness wasn't just about boxing, it was about the psychological warfare, the ability to win fights before they started, and the creation of a persona so terrifying that grown men would freeze simply from his presence. The legend was forged in moments the world never saw. That airport terminal became another forge in which the Tyson mythology was both tested and reinforced. Every person who witnessed the encounter walked away with their own version of the story, their own interpretation of what they'd seen. But they all agreed on the essential truth, that they'd witnessed something primal, a glimpse of the real power dynamics that civilization tries to paper over with rules and social contracts. The greatest fights Mike Tyson ever had weren't always in the ring. They were in moments like these, in airports, in gyms, on streets, in hallways where someone tested him and discovered that testing legends comes with consequences. These encounters never appeared on his professional record, never generated pay-per-view revenue, and never contributed to his official legacy. But in their own way, they were more revealing than any championship bout. They showed that violence isn't just a physical act, it's a language, a presence, a way of moving through the world that communicates volumes before a word is spoken or a punch is thrown. Tyson spoke this language fluently, having learned it in the hardest schools imaginable. And even as he tried to leave that life behind, to become something gentler and more at peace, the language remained his native tongue. Joseph Carrington learned that night that some tests shouldn't be administered. Some questions shouldn't be asked. Some legends earned their status through experiences that can't be replicated or truly understood from the outside. He walked onto that plane believing he could have stood toe-to-toe with Mike Tyson in his prime. He walked off that plane knowing the truth, that confidence without wisdom is just another word for delusion. Legends are forged in fire that most people only hear about. The airport security footage was recorded over after 30 days, as per standard protocol. No cell phone video of the encounter ever surfaced online. The witnesses scattered to their destinations and their lives, carrying the story with them but unable to prove it beyond their own testimony. And so the incident joined the vast collection of Tyson's untold moments, the encounters that don't make documentaries but are whispered about in boxing gyms, shared in late-night conversations among fighters who understand what it means to truly face danger. Mike Tyson settled into his seat on that plane, closed his eyes, and tried to find peace. Behind him, in the airport terminal, life continued its chaotic flow, indifferent to the small drama that had just unfolded. The plane lifted into the night sky, carrying its passengers toward their destinations, and the moment passed into memory, unrecorded, unverified, but absolutely real. And that's how legends are forged in moments the world never sees. Not through manufactured drama or carefully staged publicity, but through authentic confrontations where reputation meets reality and reality blinks first. These are the stories that matter most because they reveal truth rather than brand. They show that sometimes the most powerful thing a fighter can do isn't throwing a punch, it's showing someone exactly why they should be grateful that punch never came. The night swallowed the plane, and with it, one more chapter in the mythology of Iron Mike Tyson, a chapter written not in blood or victory, but in restraint, wisdom, and the terrible knowledge that comes from being dangerous and choosing differently.